G'day, g'day, welcome back. In today's episode, the Pope and the Patriarch, a Christian reunion is brewing. Tim Ayres goes full Chalmers, and the People's First March. I'm going to shamelessly plug my friend Emeka. All that and more on the Mark Perotta Show.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Blaster! Welcome to the Mark Perotta Show.
Before we get into the main topics, let's dig into some news items that have happened over the weekend and just today. It's been a rather busy Monday. Just announced today, major overhauls of the Australian defence bureaucracy have been announced. The government under Richard Marles unveiled a sweeping restructure, the formation of a new defence delivery agency, consolidating 3 existing arms, that is, capability acquisition, guided weapons and ordnances, and naval shipbuilding into one single body. The move, described as the most significant shake-up since the 1970s, aims to improve efficiency, spending, oversight, and project delivery as Australia ramps up defence spending, that is according to Reuters. Now, what's the reasoning behind this? So it turns out there is a flotilla that is hovering in and around the Philippine Sea, which is owned by North Korea, or as they like to call themselves, the People's Liberation Army. Now, in my mind, this is too little too late. Australia has been calling for an increase in defence spending for almost a decade now, with polls showing that up to 15 to 25% of Australians class it as one of their top topics that need to be spoken about more in Parliament, and the one thing that's on their mind. And so I hope they can get this done quickly. Potentially there is an opportunity to get this done in an efficient manner. And migrating from 3 to 1 will actually be very good in reducing a lot of the bureaucratic fodder that exists. So I do like this move. It may be too little too late. And hopefully we haven't burnt our relationship with America so much that they won't come to our aid. The stock market today suffered a technical difficulty just before 9 a.m. This technical difficulty caused delays in publishing corporate announcements, a blow to the market infrastructure at a sensitive time, according to the Economic Times. On the same day, the broader Australian stock market slid by about 0.57%, reflecting investor caution. This comes amidst a slew of already intense and very strange times for the Australian internet. Now, effectively since the introduction of the NBN, Australia has had a highly unstable network environment. It is not a network that is reliable for average business purposes, let alone something as large as the ASX, which effectively funds our entire economic system. We spoke about the failures of the Bureau of Meteorology website with its almost $100 million cost blowout. And now we're starting to see issues with the ASX pop up at a time when both energy reliability and network reliability are on tenterhooks, and only because of government policy. A veteran support centre has closed down. Oasis Townsville, regarded as the leading veteran support hub in Queensland, will close permanently on the 12th of December 2025 due to funding shortfalls, leaving many veterans and families without vital resources. This already comes amidst a slew of issues within the veteran community, specifically related to suicide. Now, veteran suicide in this country has been on the rise at about the same pace as male suicide has been on the rise. At this point, approximately 50 men per week are committing suicide in this country. We have a very, very sinister issue when it comes to the mental health of men. And now the mental health of men is being touted as something that should be looked at by psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists. But in the same amount of time that more men have started going to therapy, suicide has more than doubled among men. We do not have a therapy issue or really a mental health problem in this country. What we have is a rising disenfranchisement problem in this nation. Men no longer feel necessary in a society that classes them as second tier. And this isn't just something that exists within men. News broke today from 2GB that showed that insurance companies are now offering a non-binary discount. Now, whether this is just a glitch in the system or something that is priced in, non-binary individuals, when comparing two quotes of the exact same nature outside of gender selection, are coming in approximately 10 to 15% lower than the average man's insurance bill. Now, the equivalency here is interesting to say the least. Now, I might be speculating on this one, but it could be the case that the reason that non-binary people have a lower insurance amount is because they effectively own nothing, as a general rule of thumb. If you have enough time in your day to be spending your precious brain hours wondering whether you are a man, a woman, or in this case, neither, both, a mix of the two, 22% male, 13% furry, and 60% woman, then you probably don't have a lot of time spent actually working, which effectively means that you probably don't own too much. And so the amount of insurance that you're going to actually have to need and the chance of you owning anything of value is next to nothing. And so it could simply be a consequence of that. However, it's far more likely that this is just another DEI initiative to get more people into insurance, paying premiums for companies that hate your gut. I've never enjoyed the idea of insurance. Insurance is the most pessimistic outlook. And so when the government stops funding Veterans Affairs locations within this country, contributing significantly now to the rise in mental health issues, veteran societies are the best place for men. Sports, right? Community, a sense of purpose, okay, a sense of belonging. And amidst this mental health crisis, the government won't fund this, but they'll fund 20% off everyone's HECS debt, which is a self-incurred cost despite what insane degree you decided to go and get. Let's get into our main news topics. Unfortunately, making these sorts of little please do's is kind of essential. I enjoy doing it just for the fun of it, but at the same time, if you want to get a message out, you need the people in your community to just comment, like, subscribe, all of the normal jargon, right? Please just take a moment and give me a hand. We need to create a culture of commentary together. And I love the messages coming in my DMs. Put it in the comments section so that everyone else can see it too. Thank you. Pope Leo has kicked off the first week of Advent with a visit to Turkey, right in the location where the Council of Nicaea happened, where we get the Nicene-Constantinople Creed. He kicked off Advent in this way by meeting with leaders from the Orthodox Church. Let's take a quick look at a sort of short video that was put together by the Vatican in recognition of this meeting, which I believe is very significant at this time.
What is a gift from God?
For those who are just listening to this, I'll give a brief explanation as to what just happened. Pope Leo XIV visited the Ecumenical Patriarch in Istanbul in Turkey on Sunday the 30th of November, invited by Patriarch Bartholomew to attend the Divine Liturgy at the Venerable Patriarchal Church of St. George. Over 400 members of the Holy Synod of the Ecumenical Patriarch and members of the Episcopate made up the congregation at the Divine Liturgy on this day, celebrating the patron feast of the Apostle Andrew. Now, what is very interesting is the apostolic line from both of these churches. And I found it intriguing because throughout the Bible, we see stories of the firstborn and the secondborn or the youngest born of a family, and how the firstborn has this sort of righteous indignation as to the love or the honor or the role that is bestowed to the youngest instead of to the oldest. So Andrew was the first of the apostles. He is also the older brother of St. Peter. Throughout the Bible, we see this story repeated. It's ad nauseum. It is a running motif. Isaac over Ishmael, even though Ishmael was the firstborn technically of Abraham. Jacob over Esau. Joseph over all of his 10 brothers. Judah over his brothers for the messianic line. David was chosen over his 7 older brothers. Ephraim blessed over Manasseh. Moses over Aaron. Gideon chosen over the stronger brother. And Solomon, who was not the eldest, chosen as David's heir. Then we get to Peter and Andrew. And what's interesting about this, and I don't want to be too cocky about it, but in every single one of these, the one who is chosen, who is younger, is the one who becomes the great leader. And it is interesting to me that the Orthodox Church, despite its beauty, despite the fact that its sacramentals are actually accepted by the Catholic Church, while in mild schism, they are almost identical in theology, almost identical. There are very, very few differences, the majority of which are Marian, the majority of which obviously papal, apostolic, and authority. But for the most part, these two churches are very, very similar. I believe that it is incumbent upon the Orthodox Church to realize this truth throughout the Bible, even as far as Cain and Abel. And so there is this motif throughout the Bible that give unto the youngest what is given by the Father unto the youngest. Now, Jesus quite specifically said that Peter was to hold the keys to the kingdom. And that apostolic tradition has passed down through generations. And so I believe it is incumbent upon the Orthodox Church to put aside its pride and say, let us join under the authority of the papacy, guiding it in the way that an older brother does, because an older brother is a guide like no one else, and empower the Catholic Church with the beauty and the reverence that we see within Orthodoxy. This is a really awesome step. There were quite a few different things that happened that are a little bit deep, and I don't want to get too far into them at the moment, not least because I haven't quite wrapped my head around everything just yet. But this is a momentous occasion for Christianity, specifically in that original Eastern and Western tradition, that Eastern and Western schism, a reuniting moment. Several of these have happened, but none to this extent. And Pope Leo brings that. He brings a sense of trying to heal both worlds. His mission at the moment is world peace. And peace means treaty, and treaty means a common vision towards reconciling differences. And so this might be the fruition of a new age of debate among Christians instead of disdain for the decisions made by either party. As I've said, I've been joining odd lives and I've been listening to some really interesting ones from Eastern Orthodox, and it is a beautiful tradition. 95% of it is identical to Catholicism, but the way that they took it was so much more spiritual. Whereas the Catholic Church, I find, focuses a little bit more on the body than the Orthodox does. The Orthodox is far more about the reverence to the Lord, whereas we are a little bit more, it's where we get, faith through works on the Opus Dei side. And you have the work of your body to glorify God. And those two things can come together. I think the Marian doctrines will create some sort of divide, but more debate is better, not worse. So I'm very happy that Pope Leo has taken this on. Let's get into Tim Ayres. Today we got the privilege of watching Tim Ayres, who is the grumpy-looking, most un-Santa-like, but Santa-looking person that you could possibly find. Tim Ayres is a senator from New South Wales who is somehow, and I've spoken about this multiple times, the Minister for Industry and Innovation and also the Minister for Science. Now, the Minister for Industry and Innovation I can understand. Well, industry, yes. For innovation, less so. Tim Ayres has spent effectively his entire career as a union jock, effectively a unionist at heart. And everyone knows that unions are antithetical to innovation. Because what unions do is they stifle innovation by prioritizing the rights of the worker over the rights of the industrialist, over the rights of the owner. Now, there is a balance there, and for a very long time, unions were necessary because industrialism is how you get modern-day slavery. And so having the unions there to lambast against industrialists by becoming their own version of industrialists was a good thing. However, what it also did is it 100% stifled the ability for companies to send their profits towards greater innovation and instead have to focus in on regulation, rules, higher wages without real necessity for higher wages, legal disputes, protests, walkouts. So member for industry or minister for industry, okay. Minister for innovation, barely. How are you the minister for science? That's what I want to know. That makes no sense. But today we got to watch Tim Ayres reply into questions from Dean Smith. Now, it's a bit of a long clip, but it is very, very interesting. Just listen into what he effectively says about probably about 50% of the Australian population at this point.
Will the government make a public statement in regards to what, if any, additional resources are required to support Mr Bowen in his new role?
We'll deal with it.
High level of interest?
The what?
There's a high level of interest. I'm interested.
The way I describe the level of interest is there's a high level of interest in certain circles. They are very small circles, Senator Smith, and as I look across the Senate, there's a sort of febrile anticipation of these issues. The truth is here that Australia has extended its influence in a very significant way around future negotiations that will have much to do with our economic as well as our environmental interests. I can think of a few areas that go to our economic security, our national security, the security of our Pacific partners and the region, our economic interest, then negotiations around future emissions reduction and industrial frameworks are associated with that. That's a good thing. Minister Bowen will be engaged in that in the Australian interest, and you'd have to be pretty small-minded and unpatriotic to be arguing anything else.
You'd have to be small-minded and unpatriotic to be arguing anything else. Well, I mean, with a statement like that this is going to boost Australian security, it's going to boost economic investment and our power across the globe, you'd think there'd be a line of history behind his statement for him to come out and insult 50% of the Australian population. There must be a plethora of evidence of other countries that have been the president without hosting, and in doing so gained multiple billions of dollars as a consequence with regional security and climate guarantees. And if you do a quick Google search, or better yet, throw it into ChatGPT and just ask, how many countries over the last 10 years have not hosted a COP, but have been the president of them. You come up with 2 countries, and let's compare the pairs, okay? Chile and Fiji. Now, just looking at the numbers, Australia is now being compared not with the countries who have hosted in the past with, vibrant economies like Germany or France, the United States. No, we're being compared now with Fiji and Chile. Fiji doesn't even have a recognizable GDP at all. Chile's GDP at least is recognizable, but it's nothing to gloat about. Chile's GDP is 6.26 billion. Australia's is at about 1.83 trillion, both in US dollars. So that is to say that Australia's economy is approximately 10 times larger than Chile's, and our regional influence and our ability to garner influence in the world is at about the same scale of both Chile and Fiji. So Tim Ayres' decision to insult 50% of the Australian population, does that seriously seem like something that is worthy of a statement like that? Small-minded and unpatriotic. To be asking questions about why our climate minister, who while we're in the middle of a climate crisis, more like an energy crisis, is going to be gallivanting across the globe playing kingmaker for another country. What does this role actually entail? Effectively, all it is Chris Bowen is going to be the paperboy for Turkey. That is to say that Chris Bowen is going to be the one sending emails. Chris Bowen is going to be the one reaching out, taking questions, ensuring that the correct delegates are there. And if I'm going to put my tinfoil hat on just for a second, we've already spoken about how globally the climate crisis hysteria is slowly starting to fade. Massive names are starting to pull away from their net zero targets. Bill Gates, who was the stalwart billionaire that all billionaires could follow into the great green beyond, has pulled away his support and said that humans need to come first. And so could we see at COP31 Australia falling on its own sword and being the sacrificial lamb to end the entire COP framework? Australia's economy is large enough that it would be a significant failure that people would say that potentially this no longer has merit. But it's not so large that it would affect the global economy in a way that would be disastrous. And Chris Bowen is, and at least has been recently, an unmitigated disaster when it comes to achieving anything. And so tinfoil hat prediction on Chris Bowen fails miserably at this task. Australia has to fall on its sword, and not only will Tim Ayres eat his words, but he will have to come out with an apology to those who have stated that this might be an issue and that we gain nothing. Not only that, that we will be spending money to achieve this. And what baffles me is this isn't the first time that Tim Ayres has come out and, played the Chalmers card and called everyone crackers and cookpots, or cookers and crackpots, effectively, for asking questions about something that needs to have questions asked about it. This is a man who is a union rep. His job is to create manufacturing jobs. That's his entire job. That's been his career. And yet the amount of manufacturing jobs in Australia as a result of the net zero policy to date has been next to nothing. 99% of solar panels are made outside of Australia. That means imported from other nations. The majority of green projects are now being sold out to Chinese companies, not to Australian companies. The only jobs that seriously get made here in Australia as a consequence of net zero are electricians and mechanics. Now, that is a good thing, but those people could just as easily be working on coal-fired plants which can't be imported from another country. Those coal-fired plants need to be built here, maintained here. And with that energy security, manufacturers would have lower power bills, which means they'd be able to actually create manufacturing jobs in this country. Do you think it's a coincidence that in the same amount of time that we've tried to target net zero, Australian manufacturing has fallen through the ground? We effectively make nothing in this country anymore. And Tim Ayres, the astute union rep, Minister for Industry, his decision is to lambast 50% of the Australian population, calling them small-minded. Maybe listening to the UN overlords and the climate cookers makes you small-minded. When the world narrative, the propaganda that is pushed upon us from every single angle with news reports that could be copy-pasted across the globe come out and you decide to say that the people who are small-minded are not the people who are willing to go to the slaughter like lambs, but are those who are asking questions of, are you actually a wolf in sheep's clothing? Maybe you need to take a look in the mirror, Mr. Ayres. Because from everything I can see, you are both insulting and failing the Australian population. And you ought to be ashamed as a representative of this country to be sitting up there on a podium and insulting those who would question you. Because it's our job to question you. You are our representative. It is your job to be questioned, no matter how big, no matter how small, and you ought to answer with something better than a pure insult. Let's get on to the Australia First March. My friend Emeka was a honorary speaker at the Australia First March that happened down in Victoria. Now, that march was much smaller than anticipated. There were still several thousand people who marched through the streets. However, as one of the organisers came out and said, this march was not advertised as something that was offensive. And that is something that I've found problematic, even myself, in starting this out, is that in order to be effective, you almost have to be insulting in today's world. Intellect doesn't get you very far. The things that people find interesting are the things that are insulting. And that is a very difficult line to toe, because you want to be able to garner interactions with people, but if the only way that you can do that is by insulting people, then we're in for a pretty divisive world. Now, I'd love to say that I've been perfect in this, but I definitely haven't, and I've fallen into the trap of being insulting, and I probably will again, and chances are that I might even do it intentionally, because at some point, you want to be able to grow your message, but those insults live there forever. And you have to be able to cop them on the chin when someone says, how dare you have said this? And you say, well, this is the place that I was coming from. And this is what I actually wanted to say. But if I'd just said that, would you have listened? Or would you have just said, pfft? But if I make you angry and you have a visceral reaction to something, then you want to reply and then we can engage in a conversation. But if I just come out with an intellectual response that just shuts you down instantly and you just feel insulted insofar as you say, oh, that's stupid, I'm not going to listen to that, I see a good opinion that I don't like, then I'm just going to scroll past it. Whereas if I insult you, your visceral response is to respond. But this march was entirely unoffensive. Pauline Hanson even came up and gave a really, really nice uniting speech. And that's the message that she gave even when she put that burqa on, right? She put forward a motion to be heard inside of the Senate and said, well, if you're not going to hear me, then you're going to see me and I'm going to be insulting about it, so you have a visceral reaction. And she did, and everyone listened. And it went around the world. If she had just put forward a bill and it was just sitting in the Senate, and Jared Rennick came out and did a post about this, right? He came out and said that Pauline Hanson's just being insulting and that's all she can do. Unfortunately, yeah. That is the world that we live in. The world that we live in is that you insult and then you interact. Not you create an intellectual piece of work and then someone engages with it from an intellectual perspective, because everyone is now a part of the public forum. In the past, the university wasn't just for anyone who got a 55 and above ATAR who wanted to study a philosophy degree. It was the highest of the highest with an endorsement from someone, and if you failed your grades, you failed out of the class. And it was a very, very select few who created the information that trickled down to the rest of society. Now, each have their benefit. Okay, you get much clearer, much neater information, and the information was able to trickle down to society before. But in the same way, it was much easier to gatekeep info. Right? It was much easier to stop people from effectively having alternative ideas, and coercive control was much easier. But now we're in a situation where there is so much information that the only way to break through the noise is to be the noise, is to be the person who actually rocks the boat. Okay, not just survive on the boat that is rocking, that is this life. But we'll listen to the last piece of Emeka's speech at the Australia First rally and his call to action and what the march is about, why it was so unoffensive, and the new message that is being pushed that people can rally behind. And rally behind the things that are unoffensive, the things that are meant to unite behind a common vision of the way that this country can work through capitalism and charity instead of communism and collective poverty.
But here's the one last thing I want to land on. As far as racism is concerned, Australians just want a space where we can just unite, and in unity, regardless of the color of your skin, where you're from, or what language you speak. If you come to Australia and you are willing to contribute to the society, just like I did as a migrant, then you are welcome here. If you are willing to assimilate and follow the values of the Western culture that makes the Western world work, which, by the way, was the foundation of Christian values. Those were the things that made the West work. And so if we allow people to come here, they refuse to assimilate, they refuse to contribute to the culture, and they decide they're going to bring their own thing here, I'm a black guy who's saying, go back to where you came from. Get there now. Because we didn't come here to change the place, we come here to make the place better. And if you're not going to do that, you are not welcome here. So by the way, if this hurts you, if you feel sad about what I'm saying or angry, maybe it is because I'm talking to you wherever you are. It's time for you to go home. Because in Australia, Christ is King. And he will remain King, no matter what. Thank you for having me.
Strong, powerful, Christian. A lot of yelling towards the end there. I love him. I think he's a legend. He's rising up very, very quickly. He is the perfect model of what it means to be a good immigrant in this country. He came here, he worked his butt off, and now he's trying to give back and create a pathway for immigrants who want to come here for the right reasons, not to sponge off the system, but to supply their value to this nation. Not to change it and call it racist and say that the people who are here are problematic, but to be a patriot for the country that more than likely saved their lives, that gave them and their children and the descendants that would come after them a place that they could call home, free from the hellscape that was their original homeland. That's not every immigrant, but as a general rule of thumb, if you throw a dart at Africa, you're going to run into a place that is fueled by corruption, chaos, and persecution. And in today's day and age, the Middle East is the same, and Europe is fast heading that way as well. So well done to the organizers of this rally. I'm sure that there will be more. Not only do I think that there will be more, I think they will become bigger and better. I think this is the right vision. I agree that Christ is King and that we need a revolution and a revival of faith in this nation, and that we can take that message of unity all the way from Lebanon and bring it here to our great nation. That'll do for the show today. My name is Mark Perotta, and this is the Mark Perotta Show. God bless.